So let's get started. I think Jeff was the first to raise their hand. Jeff, the floor is yours.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. I've been a fan of Lakoff since I don't know when, 20, maybe 30 years ago. Uh, and I think I even saw him in Berkeley once, although I'm not sure that I ever spoke to him. So even though I came in late, I felt like I was because you were just basically reviewing the idea of metaphors that we live by, which is one of his two greatest books, actually. The So, but for this topic, what I wanted to maybe hear, maybe you didn't have time to get there, is the why why do politicians or political actors um, lean on metaphors to make their case? And my hypothesis, it's almost obvious, really, but is that if we tell people something explicitly, there is something in language that basically it's almost like all the words in our language appear as a result of court cases to pile on the legal metaphor, right? And so that means they're all rebuttable. These are all been used to make arguments where either side could have won. It was just a consequence, but not a necessary consequence that somebody won or lost in that. So what we get when we would do the metaphor is we get people to position them to make conclusions without argument. That I think is sort of what occurred to me in this, which is that the reason we use the metaphors is because if we said explicitly what we thought, then at best we'd have a computation, and there'd be some people would disagree because it's not worth going to war. It is worth going to war. You need something that to really get real agreement that's not laced with qualifications. You need to have something that doesn't uh, appear to come from argument. It doesn't make an argument. It's like, look, you just see it, and you have to see it, and that's one thing I like about Lakoff. Is like it's all about we're not trying to develop proofs of things. We're trying to get people to see things. It's very weighted towards perception instead of judgment. But the downside the downside for peacemakers in this case is that then they don't get a chance to, if someone's clobbered by one of these metaphor, then they don't see any need to argue about it, right? Which of course is what the actor wants. So anyway, that was my twist and slight addition to what you said. Thanks.
Yeah, yeah, thank you, Jeff. Yeah, that's exactly what I would say, if I wanted to explain why those metaphors are used, right? These metaphors are used to gain the support of the public, right? To see the actions of the government as morally correct, right? Because definitely they want to justify their actions, right? And they want to justify the actions for the well, in the case of the War of the Gulf, for the American citizens, but also for the world, right? Um, However, what we shouldn't be forgetting is that, and I know that I didn't want to talk about the current war, but Putin is not the villain in his own country, right? Like the media represent the Russian army as the hero defending, the weak, and so that's something that we should not be forgetting about that. So, and of course it's not 100%, and definitely some people will disagree with people who live in Russia will disagree with the politics that is happening, but the media is going to have the just war fairy tale story, just like the um, and that's interesting that you're going to get countries with totally opposing, well, because every country is, I guess, the hero in their own books, so to say, when they go to war. So I guess the point is not to argue, like at least here, about the, what is really happening. The point is to understand that whatever we are hearing is a point of view. That the person who is using these frameworks is have their own agenda, and they're trying to get us to agree, and they're also trying to get us to get an emotional response from us, or to hide their emotional response, right? For example, if we get the sentence, the enemy was neutralized, right? This sentence is a much calmer sentence than if, they said on the news 120 young men between the age of 18 and 21 were killed in the bomb explosion, right? So because this would not be popular with the public, right? But when they're saying it this way, the enemy was neutralized. This is nice and neat. The enemy is this again state as a person, so you don't see the individuals, you see the bad guy attacking or whatever, and it was neutralized. So, but then again, we know what neutralized means in war terms. Thank you, Jeff. Tori, you were next.
Okay, thank you, Victoria, and thank you for your presentation. I loved it. It's great, and I'm also, like the previous speaker, also a fan of George Lakoff and Johnson. What I want to just comment on is how important, and you spelled it out very well, that there's that in our rational cognition, metaphors are inescapable, and we think via through metaphors, and even bodily metaphors, like up and down and back and forward and behind us and in front of us, and how it really overturns Enlightenment notions of rationality, which are, and for that matter, understanding international politics, including things like wars and nation states in conflict, and the sort of the Enlightenment rationality, as Lakoff says, considers being rational is like a mathematical proof. And people who do AI, for example, think that they're thinking like a computer. Intelligence is like a computer. There's a central processor, there's binary logic, there's digital states of the system going in a rational step kind of function. And so we really are, but Lakoff and Johnson, and like your presentation, it's metaphorical. So we have this prejudice that being metaphorical is poetic and literary, and it's really not, as you said, maybe neutral, or it's not objective, it's not precise, and the tradition in 20th century analytical philosophy is this very, in logical positivism, it's a very strict, you start with definitions and then you make deductions. In economics, you start with mathematical models and you crank algebraically to find determinate solutions into the future, not realizing that the mathematical model, the series of equations, is the metaphor. It's a metaphor. The economy works like this mathematical system of equations, not realizing that our rationality is metaphorical through and through. We can't get away from it. And so we have this aversion towards realizing that it's metaphorical. We want to be precise. We want to be neutral. We want to be exact. And then it plays into sort of questions like you said about morality. We think we can get rid of making moral choices. Hume made the statement, there's no way from getting from an is to an ought. You can know, but the fact is, it's not about logical entailment. It's more about we exist as life forms in time, and so anything that we might know about something rationally, we're gonna there's always going to be a a a moral issue involved. So we cannot get out of that. So it's just this sort of demonstration by Lakoff and Johnson that we are metaphorical even in our rationality. It really flips the tables to we don't like to think that way. We like to think that we can get very rational decisions and concepts and truth, and going to be somewhat imprecise. And just on your last uh, image of the six blind men touching the elephant, it goes to the point that objectivity is always comes out of an intersubjectivity. There's always each person has a piece of it's their own perspective on the phenomenon in that case being the elephant. And each person has their truth as to what that phenomenon is. It's a snake, it's a tree stump, it's whatever. But then communicating it. So there's metaphors in the personal individual cognition, but then communicating amongst the different blind people, there's a larger objectivity of the thing, but even that is never really precisely determined as what we want to think that it is. So, I mean, even if you have a war, between the USA and Iran, there's all the players involved touching it. There's not going to be. It's a phenomenon that has multiple perspectives, and it's almost like the communication amongst all of the parties will never come to a very precise objectivity. Everything is fantasy, everything is subjective, and that doesn't mean rationality is impossible. Rationality is just a way that we work through in a given moment of our existence how to understand our cognitive situation. And we just what it comes down to is communication to resolve what the objective situation is and what the next step to do is to resolve any kind of conflict or disagreement or something. So it really, my main point is the mainstream concept of rationality is false, because we're so automatically thinking in terms of metaphors to understand our situation. And it's I think in this world today, we would do well to realize how much we think metaphorically, and how important it is in our communication with people, especially to resolve conflicts or to democratically self-govern ourselves. We have to realize that we have this inner subjectivity, and it's only through that inner subjectivity that we find some sense of an objective situation that we're all in. And that was kind of long-winded, but
thank
so
you.
thanks
You,
for
Tori. Yeah, I totally agree with your idea of intersubjectivity. That's why I thought that the image of the elephant was so fitting at the end of this presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of the thing is that sometimes even if we communicate, right? If the blind men communicated with each other and they were describing one part as the snake and the other part as the rope, I don't know if they were able to actually figure out a common truth.
Well,
Yeah,
it's kind of
that's
like they're committed to continuing to
yeah,
communicate.
yeah,
They're never going to be unblind. They're always going to be
yeah,
blind, and the
yeah.
only way out is to continue to communicate. Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. And being aware is important. Being aware of alternative frames. I guess and it was interesting because I met somebody a few weeks ago and they mentioned that, okay, well, I was going to do this talk. And he was like, yeah, well, but it's clear, right, that they're all metaphors and frames. Why do we need to talk about it? And I was like, well, because some people are not aware that there is an alternative point of view, and that the point of view that they are exposed to is maybe not the only one, which is especially important these days, because when we look at social media knows what we like, and they're going to pitch us the more stuff that we're going to agree with. So we are going to be thinking that the rest of the world thinks the way we think,
Yeah.
and the stuff that we do not agree with, that we would be against, we are not exposed to it, so we may not even aware that this point of view exists, because that's the algorithm of social media. So I do believe that it is especially important to kind of like to and he was like, well, why would you want to do that? Well, because I talked to a guy from a small town in the Netherlands, and I asked him, do you trust everything you hear on the news? And he said, yes, of course.
Yes.
And I was like, but why? And he said, well, because why would they lie to us? So,
Good luck.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, anyway, thank you, Tori. And Ted is next.
Oh, yeah.
Ted,
Hi.
can you? Thank
I
you for
guess
waiting.
what I was probably started off when the conversation started going, I think I kind of realized that I had too broad a definition of metaphor in my head, where I was probably thinking idioms, maxims, adages, proverbs. That's kind of, I think, language that, in just being lazy with the use of the word metaphor, I might have broadly included, but I know they don't fit by the way we're talking about it here. But I guess that led me to the idea of, we've been talking about this use of these words in the framework of English and Western culture, and I can't help wondering if this is actually something that we universally agree on in all languages and all cultures. Is this general idea of the way we're using this war language, is that's the same language that's being used in Farsi or in I don't know, Yiddish? Is it the exact same concepts that we all actually agree on? Is this in front of us? Is this behind us? Is this a universal that we actually all agree on?
Thank you for your question, Ted. So that's a good question, and I have a couple of answers for you. So on the one hand, George Lakoff actually has a couple of answers. On the one hand, there are certain universals, like the archetype of a hero. I think pretty much every country and every ethnicity is going to have some kind of fairy tale where you've got this dichotomy, the hero versus villain, or villains and the victim, because that's basically that. And again, this comes out of our physical experiences, right? Where primitive people, that's how they survived. You had the hero who helped the tribe, or who helped the weaker member of the tribe, and so that comes from the yeah, from the ancient times, so to say. But interestingly, some concepts are not universal. For example, George Lakoff has a book called Women, Fire, and Dangerous Things, and in that book he actually talks about different languages having interesting, nuanced metaphors of their own. So, for example, an argument in the Western world is often described in terms of war. But in Japan, I think it's a dance. And
Hmm.
then you can, like, the framework is totally different, right? Because if we look at an argument and think of it in the war terms, then we are going to be more aggressive, more assertive, and, like the stakes are kind of like higher. Whereas if you think of an argument as a dance, then it's a whole different story. There's more nuance to it. Maybe there's no winner loser dichotomy in this situation. So definitely there are some different metaphors, but I think there are also some universals. I hope this makes sense.
Hmm.
And we have, yeah, thank you. Thank you. We have Rick next.
Hi, thank you for the talk, Victoria. I quite enjoyed it. And I can still remember my very first philosophy class I took in university back 50 years ago almost. And that was logic and critical thinking. And the first thing we learned are the logical fallacies. And arguing by analogy was one of the big ones. When you argue by analogy, if your analogy isn't accurate, your argument goes out the window. And metaphors and analogies are, well, very similar. And I always remembered that, and I always tried to avoid arguing by analogy. But sometimes someone throws one at you and you got to respond. And I was, again, about 50 years ago, my friend of mine, we were in university together. We were sitting around a table arguing, and he threw out a metaphor. He says, "You're putting the horse the cart before the horse." And I looked at him and I says, "Yes, so the horse pushes rather than pulls." And he looked at me and he started laughing and he says, "I forget what we were arguing about after that." But sometimes you just have to, if you are dealing with metaphors, you have to know how to break them apart and to really get to the root of something, metaphorically speaking, I mean.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you, Rick. Thank you. And that's an interesting use of metaphor to kind of turn it around on its head. Yeah, I don't have any come back to it, so I'm gonna give a word to B. We have a person called B. Can you please unmute yourself, B? You're muted. Your microphone is muted.
Yes, thank you so much, Victoria. Um, my question also revolved around how do you fight off these metaphors? Because, from what I gather from your talk and the discussion, they're just they use metaphors as a kind of shortcut. When you said like, oh, some people are like cancer, and we all kind of know that, cancer is bad. So like it's just a shortcut for people to like not use rationality and just go straight to emotion. So how do you like unwind that clock? How do you uh, um, slow down people's thinking? Because, I think a lot of the time, like when you use, they use propaganda, they use a lot of, like you said, metaphors and, the villain versus victim. Um, so how do we kind of fight off this metaphor, like these shortcuts, like a heuristic way that we have learned how to see the world through these metaphors and actually kind of break down the arguments when we're discussing this or when we're being fed this shit from the media?
Yeah, so this is your question. Thank you, B. Well, I mean, my short answer is critical thinking. That's something that we should apply with whatever news we are hearing, whatever metaphors we are hearing. You're right. It's a shortcut, but it's not just a shortcut. It creates an emotional response, right? It creates a certain attitude. If we see the enemy as cancer, it already creates, it touches on some deep strings in our mind, so to say, where we immediately have this attitude of the enemy is necessarily bad and the government is good. So, I mean, the short and long answer could be making sure that we apply critical thinking to whatever we are hearing. And I mean, war is war. The enemy is not just some kind of abstract notion. There are people, usually young men, who go and die on both sides. So that's something I guess we should always think about. And the other thing is that there are very few, like, I think I'm going to repeat myself, there are very few wars where there's like a black and white situation, where there's a clear aggressor and a clear victim. Usually the situations are more complex than that. And again, just being aware of the fact that there is more to what they're saying, because yeah, you're right, it's propaganda. Every single public speaker is going to have their own propaganda, their own agenda that they're trying to push on us. We just have to be careful with what we are letting, what we are perceiving, and maybe try and it's very difficult to avoid having an emotional response. Like Tori said, it's just impossible to escape those metaphors, unfortunately. But at least raising above the like unconscious or subconscious response and trying to like, wait, okay, I have this response, but okay, I'm gonna wait, and maybe I'm gonna do more research before I say I agree with this point of view. Thank you. We have Howard next.
Is it okay if I just tag on? Because
Yeah.
I just want that particular point, and we're not going to take another turn.
Yeah,
Just
sure.
basically, I think I'm pretty sure this was where Lakoff went with it, which is that being critical, either in the Kantian sense or analytical, is not the solution. That's just another metaphor. And I'm pretty sure it's been so long since I looked at it now, I don't remember, but he's worked out. When he complains about the state of philosophy, that's what he does. And that's one of the large work that he wrote with Lakoff. Basically, it's not a question of critical thinking or metaphorical thinking. All of it's metaphorical all the way down. I think I'll stop there.
And I mean, in a way, Jeff, you are right, because there's something that I've been thinking about, and I don't remember, like, Mark Johnson has written his own works separately from George Lakoff, and there's one book in which he mentions that, yeah, it's so metaphors are not just figures of speech. I think he mentioned that's why I didn't want to talk about it, because I didn't quite remember. He mentioned that there was some kind of a study where I guess there were MRI studies where they had participants, and the participants reacted to some sentences about physical events. Maybe it was about up and down, or warm and cold. Maybe it was about something more complex. And then they were introduced the same concepts, like metaphorically, like when we were talking about a warm person and warm feelings, and the same neurons were firing when they were hearing the sentence related to the physical experience and the metaphor. So the metaphors are literally ingrained into our body, in that the same neurons responsible for firing when we talk about our bodily experiences, the same neurons will fire when we describe some abstract concepts. And I think that's why it's impossible to escape the metaphorical thinking, and we're still going to get the neurons firing, right? But let's say if I'm hungry, I'm an adult, I know that I'm aware that I'm hungry, right? My neurons are firing, but I'm like, okay, but I cannot eat right now, or I cannot eat whatever is in front of me because it's not good for me. So I can still, raise myself a little bit above this kind of animal response and into, choosing well whatever I'm eating intellectually, in a way. I guess that's the best response I can come up with. Thank you, Jeff. Howard, thank you for waiting. The floor
No
is yours.
problem. I got a whole bunch of notes here. I'm not sure that I can deliver them in any sort of rational or logical order. It seems that first of all, that was a great presentation. As you were going through the various frames, I was applying them to contemporary politics and going, yeah, I see that, I see that, I see that. So incredibly valuable, and I think that's the virtue of concepts overall, is that they allow us to make sense of the lower order particularities. I'm thinking a couple of things, like some metaphors seem second nature and maybe unintentional, and some metaphors seem very deliberately propagandistic, and propagandistic by design. I think maybe one of the sort of the overall conceptual rubrics of a lot of the war talk is us and them. And so metaphors seem designed to be, grossly reductive and highly selective and obfuscating in a way in terms of, which historical facts or which contexts they want to either, ignore or foreground. So I think, part of it is being cued to the stories that we're hearing, the narratives that we're hearing, and the way they're being told, and some just jump out at us. On the other hand, I'm tempted to sort of defend metaphor in some ways, as you don't defend the air, but it's there. I think metaphors well conceived and well used and innovative can be very expansive and liberating. So they're not necessarily they don't have to be reductive. They can in some ways move us out of our narrow headspaces or our narrow conceptualizations as well. Yeah, no, a great presentation. I think between the body and the conceptual, there's a psychological, and maybe that's what you were getting at too with archetypes. And I was thinking of what's his name? Was it Northrop Frye? No, Joseph Campbell, and the sort of ubiquity of those stories and how they're so ingrained in us that it's hard not to respond to them, maybe unreflectively at first, right? And the whole point of, I guess, philosophy and critical thinking is to move from that unreflective reaction to, working through a series of systems that will let us, understand ourselves and the world better. But thanks so much for that presentation. Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Howard. I was thinking of Carl Jung, but I think Joseph Campbell, he worked in the same line of talking about archetypes. And I guess there is a certain psychological aspect to it for sure. And I mean, there's no need to defend them. I think metaphors are fascinating, and metaphors are tools,
Yeah.
So it's like the way they're used might not be always moral, right? But metaphors in themselves, they're beautiful. They help us make sense of everything around us, and sometimes, like they're on point more than just a physical description of something, and sometimes it's impossible to get rid of them. But no, they're totally fascinating.
And language overall, whether even if it's linear, can be deceptive or obfuscating, or can conceal more than it reveals. I don't think that's necessarily something inherent in metaphoric language, but
yeah, the language is a tool. So whoever is to blame is, the people who are using it for nefarious purposes, right? Yeah, thank you, Howard. Shishir, it's your turn finally. Yeah, please unmute yourself, Shishir. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Very well presented, and great arguments made towards how metaphors can be used negatively to try and achieve your purposes. With that said, I don't want to ignore the other side of the coin, because metaphors are bridging between the unfamiliar to the familiar. Ability to convey so much in so little words. And the question was asked, does it apply in every culture? Of course it does. Do you know all the ancient scripts were written in poetry? Why poetry? Poetry reaches for your heart. It does not reach for your logic. That's when messages get conveyed very quickly. So there's a lot of positives that do go with metaphors and how it is utilized. They ignite your imagination. Words are the most powerful drug made by mankind. Kipling. Poetry is when an emotion has found its thought, and the thought has found its words. This is the kind of thing that really reaches down and lifts us up into a different frame of mind. So metaphors can be positive. However, they do give us a lot of examples of how it is negatively used for benefit of a few, for their own gains, and absolutely true. While Plato was very much against the use of metaphors because he thought rhetoric, he suspected it. He never believed that that was really the message that was meant to be conveyed. Aristotle, on the other hand, was a little more pragmatic. On the negative side, the spinning of stories to suit a purpose. A knife can be used to cut your vegetables. A knife can be used as a weapon. So, of course, there's two sides. Words like collateral damage instead of dead civilians, special military operations instead of an incursion, enhanced interrogation, torture, boots on the ground, attack, demonizing the other side in order to get your message across. A cancerous tumor, cockroaches, axis of evil. These are all language that's been utilized in the war and certainly does not play well for those politicians or those leaders who utilize it to their purposes in order for them to gain advantage. And there's a book I recently read about how warfare is a racket, is a money racket. And of course, most of you may have read that. It was written in the World War II times. And this has never gone away. Human beings tend to repeat their mistakes over and again. So I really appreciated you bringing all these points to focus and conveyed very well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shashir. One of the links that I showed you guys at the end of the presentation is specifically about the use of euphemisms, which, Shashir gave us examples of. Yeah, I just didn't have enough time, to go into this, right? Because there's so much we could be talking about, and I was already going over the time limit. But yeah, so there's going to be a recording of this webinar where you can find those links. That then John is going to upload my presentation with the links that are actually working, and you would be able to click on them if you're interested on reading more. Thank you, Shashir. John, can you have your hand raised?
Yes, I did. Thank you very much. This was an excellent presentation, Victoria. Really made me think and think deeply, actually. So what I'm going to say, maybe, as you put it a bit earlier, a bit sensitive. But talking to you, I thought, well, no, one can't be afraid. One can't be cowardly of sort of raising these issues. And and I'm sure that you will kind of respond in the appropriate way, as it were. So here goes. And really, what I want to do, I'm going to make a few points, and then I want your reactions to them. Do they make sense? Mm-hmm. Does it fit in with your discussion? You mentioned about the first Gulf War, 1991, right? And I think it was Schwarzkopf who literally identified Saddam Hussein as Hitler. Mm-hmm. And it occurred to me, and I know you don't want to talk about politics, and it's not politics really, it's about metaphor and that sort of thing. Well, this was in 1991, even before they had thought up weapons of mass destruction. You know what I mean? And I know you don't want to talk about the current war, I'm not really talking about the current war, but Khamenei is seen as Hitler, or was seen as Hitler. And then when they killed him, Khamenei too is seen as Hitler. So my point is they're all Hitler. Tucker Carlson is Hitler as well. You know what I mean? It's ridiculous, and it speaks to your point, right?
Yeah.
The point is there must always be a Hitler. Mm-hmm. Regardless of the truth of some of these people are evil, some, you know what I mean? There must always be a Hitler.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Then
like the boogeyman.
There must always be a yeah, exactly. Regardless of the truth or the thing. Mm-hmm. Then what I realized, and it's the first time I've thought of this, is that Hitler himself is seen as Hitler. Right? So the first Hitler is Hitler, the historical character. The second Hitler is a Hitler with quotes, the one that these new figures are being, compared to. In short, distinguishing between the actual historical person and the archetype, right? And Hitler was seen as Hitler even before, if you will, I know many crimes are committed, but even before the worst of the crimes were committed. And had there been no war, would the worst of the crimes have been committed? No, you hesitated in this question of just war, and this not intended as criticism at all. I would have done the same thing. I would have treated it in exactly the same way. Is World War II actually the one sole example in history, of the just war? I'm just, throwing that out there.
No, it's not the only example. It's just definitely the example,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because
But I remember you hesitating when you said that, and I would have done the same thing myself. I would have done exactly the same thing in that discussion. And then the final fifth point is there has always been a Hitler, even before Hitler was ever born. We had Napoleon, Ivan the Terrible, you name it. Genghis Khan, as you say, that all has to be the bogeyman. So, bottom line is, I wanted to bring up those points, and I wanted to see your overall reaction to that kind of list of points. Does it just reinforce what you were saying? Is there anything more to add, type of thing?
yeah. Well, I mean, I didn't want to talk about politics because I'm not
Yeah, no,
a
no, no,
history
no
major, not a
argument.
but yeah. And then the other thing, I wasn't sure about the makeup of the current webinar because, uh, like if we had people from the Ukraine, for example, or Russia, they might
No,
have their
yeah,
own argument, and they might get really heated.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I
So,
agree.
yeah, so definitely the Second World War is not the only example. It's just definitely an example where very rarely somebody's going to disagree that Hitler was a villain. However, something that I also hesitated about, I recently visited Estonia, I think a couple of years ago.
Mhm.
And, in my narrative, so, Germany and Hitler were the bad guys and the USSR were the liberators.
Mhm. Yeah.
And Estonians have reframed it now. They are framing the USSR is the um, well, not the aggressor, but basically that there was a museum in which they were saying that
Yeah.
the Soviet troops occupied the territory of Estonia, and kind of like hinting that maybe it would have been better off if they stayed under Germany. So
Mhm.
so, so even there, things are not seen as black and white by certain nations, and that was for me. That was like, wow, like really, they are thinking that Germany was the better, like the lesser evil of the two, so to say. Yeah, but so even though like the majority of the people would like, what's happening there? There's still an alternative frame,
Well, that's a view,
you
and
know?
many of my
Yeah,
family members are Ukrainian. That's a view, not amongst those family members, but that's a view that's widely held in Ukraine, as you know, right?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There are always two sides, I guess.
There are always two sides. There are always two
Yeah,
sides. Yeah.
that's what it boils
Yeah.
down to. Anyway, thanks very much. As I say,
Yeah.
excellent presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, John. We still have people. Do you want to go on until, I don't know, what do we have, three more people?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I suggest take the next three questions and then
And
I
then
will
yeah,
come in
round
and
up.
wrap it up. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, we have B. B, it's your turn. Can you please unmute yourself? Yeah.
Yes, my question is, you mentioned like, using rationality and slowing down our thinking and all of that stuff, critical thinking, but that takes time and effort. And somebody mentioned that we can't escape the metaphors, and you even mentioned like the same neural pathways kind of show up when we think about rationality and metaphor, if I'm getting it right. So how do we reframe, and what kind of I'm wondering what kind of frames and what kind of metaphors are the most powerful, because there's like there's a lot of metaphors about like animals, like crying wolf, um being a sheep, wolf in sheep's clothing. Like, is there certain metaphors that hit harder or that are better at kind of changing the frames? Like if somebody is trying to like manipulate you, would you say things like, you know, they're poisoning the well, or they're pulling the wool over somebody's eyes, or they're telling tall tales, or they're you know, like what kind of like specific metaphors are the most effective? Like animal metaphors, or something like that kind of hits harder than others? Like that's my question.
Yeah, well, the thing is that the metaphors that you are you have given examples of are not quite the metaphors that we are talking about here. We are talking about the whole conceptual framework that is being used to form a certain attitude, and I would say, I mean, the strongest would be the oldest metaphors, and I know that this is not an exact answer to your question, but George Lakoff, at some point, he went into politics, right? And he wrote a book, Don't Think of an Elephant, in which he was explaining how the Republicans are using the framework of strict father morality and how it's working for them because this is the picture that people relate to, and the the using the strict father morality in this case works because that's how families were perceived of, right? So you've got a strong father who knows best, you've got the kids who do what the father tells them. And so he was saying that, look, the Republicans are using this and it's working, and it's much stronger than what the Democrats are doing, because the Democrats are not using this old metaphor, they're trying to use a new modified metaphor of something else, um, and that isn't working for them that well. So I guess the oldest metaphors, the archetypes, or the frames that people have been living with for hundreds and hundreds of years, they're going to work the strongest. Thank you, B, and I'm going to give word to Tori. Tori,
Okay,
it's your
thanks.
turn. Yeah. Yep.
I wanted to respond to what John had brought up, and about Hitler, what he is, and applying to other villains, um, and how that changes over time. The thing about, and as I said before, it takes an intersubjectivity of multiple people, multiple knowers, coming to terms with what they individually know, the knower known relationship that is always dependent on metaphor, um, to be communicated throughout the community to form an objectivity. So an intersubjectivity makes for an objectivity. And so, for example, when World War One ended, it became a sort of a commonplace that was the war to end all wars. And he called that war, it was so violent, so awful, so technologically, awful. They're using gas and machine guns to just obliterate and murder, people on a mass scale. They call it a war to end all war. They thought that it wasn't going to be ever a war again. Well, obviously, when World War II happened, they stopped saying that. The same thing can be said about Hitler. I mean, Hitler was, before he performed ultimately what he did in his life, he was just Hitler. He was known as Hitler, but it's in retrospect, he becomes a symbol of something. And that what one time, and what he was as a symbol of himself meant something, but later it is meant something else. So, in other words, there's a time element. We can't escape metaphorical cognition, and again, it goes deep in particularly Western culture, that we think metaphors are, this loose, undisciplined thinking into subjective thinking, and it's you can't escape that. Everything is subjective to the individual. But when you're communicating, and as time goes by, and that's the other thing, time is a really important element, that symbols take on different meanings. What a war, and to be objective about something is always created through a kind of a consensus of subjective viewpoints. And so that's changing throughout time. So it just defies the modern Western thinker that there's got to be an objective, rational, completely value-free description of phenomena, but that's just never going to happen. And so everything's a fantasy, but there is an objectivity to the world that Charles Sanders Peirce and other philosophers, including Lakoff and Johnson, there is an objective world, but it's only as the perceptions and the activities that take place in time allow that objectivity to manifest. So it's really a very frustrating thing to the Western thinker to get out of this concept that there's got to be an objective world out there and a rational, value-free way of looking at it, and it's just never going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Tori. And I totally agree with you, because I don't think we can reach objectivity, right? Like, even in terms of our physical bodies, we have our senses to perceive the world around us with, right? And those senses allow us a certain kind of access to data, but who knows, maybe if we had some senses like a bat, we would have a different kind of perception of the world. So where is the objectivity? Like, to be objective, we should be outside the world that we live in, but we are by necessity inside this world we live in, and inside our bodies.
Well, I guess I could premise it by saying there is an objective. It's really looking at experience, our living experience, that we then, as we try to cognize it and say something knowledgeable about it, this is a tail of an elephant or something. We're suddenly we create an object and a subject. I am saying that this is the table, this is an objective thing over here. But so human existence and all animal existence is sort of prior to object and subject. Both objectivity and subjectivity are creations of a intelligent being. Unlike, for example, mechanical intelligence, even though a lot of people think, mechanical, and even with agency, mechanical intelligence is going to be just like human or animal intelligence. So anyway, subject and object are actually sort of created through awareness and consciousness. It's not like Descartes and Kant said, a really absolute separation between object and subject. That separation is not. It's our experience as of being alive and being conscious, that a subject and an object emerges out of that. And then in terms of these larger objects out there in the external world to our brain, we're communicating using metaphors again, and we can start arriving at some kind of reliable, recurring objectivity out there. But it's never going to be, Kant called it, you never can really know the thing in itself, but that's almost another false idea. You're only going to know what you know, or what other people have experienced too and communicated to you. So it's always like there's always more to make an objective world from by sharing experiences through communication.
Yeah, that makes
It's a hard
sense,
thing to
Gary.
talk about.
Yeah, Sherman, thank you for waiting.
Yes, Victoria, thank you very much
Mhm.
for your presentation. And well, hearing your presentation about metaphors, and I pulled out one of my books, one of my favorite authors. His name is George Steiner,
Oh, yeah.
and he wrote a book called Language and Silence. And there's a chapter in this book it's called The Hollow Miracle. And he asked this question: what brought death to German language? And the reason why he asked that question is this. He was thinking about the quality and nature of the German language after 1945 versus the language of Goethe, Kant, Schiller, Kleist, and many of the other figures who were writing before the rise of Bismarck. And so from the time of Bismarck, the First World War, to Hitler, the Second World War, all that people heard were metaphors of war and nationalism. And then that intensified with the Second World War. So during the Second World War, Steiner wrote, the language was infected not only with these great bestialities, it was called upon to enforce innumerable falsehoods to persuade the Germans that the war was just and everywhere victorious. So language was turned upside down to say light when there was blackness, victory where there was disaster. And he quotes this German poet. And during the war, the Germans would use breakthrough, roll back, clean up, flexible, fluid lines of combat. And we're still using those words. And so when you put up all your examples of metaphor, of the military use of military metaphors in medicine, maybe education, society, could the same question be applied to the English language? Is maybe not. Is language in a sense dead, that we can only think metaphorically in military terms? Because when you think about it, since the Second World War, the First World War, there has been nothing but war. And language has become infected by that. And then when you think about the hundreds of movies that were made, again, the war movies, the extent to which military metaphor has been used, are we being trapped in military metaphor and we can't think beyond it? And I can apply that to business. How often have I heard the line, the bottom line? So in education, I would hear people talking about pedagogy, and it's always ended by saying, well, that's the bottom line. So has the English language, because of war, because of maybe even business, has become a limited language of expression? I would look at it that way. And he gave us all sorts of examples. Are we, in a sense, trapped by this military metaphor? And I don't want to sound like it's a cliche, and it's very difficult to speak like Shakespeare, but maybe we can write and speak like Dickens when he wasn't infected by war. So that's the thought I had after hearing your question.
Thank you, Sherman. I do believe that we are using a lot of war metaphors, but the examples that I gave, I got by actually searching metaphors of war. So I got what I was looking for. I'm sure if I, looked for metaphors of something else, I don't know, spatial metaphors, then I would be getting some other examples. So I don't think we're limited by these metaphors of war. And honestly, I didn't know that the bottom line is a war metaphor. I always thought
Well,
about
no,
it
that's a
as an
business.
accounting,
That's a
an
business
account.
metaphor.
Yeah, that's an accounting metaphor, right? So it's
Yes.
not related to war, right? So
No, no.
so we're not just we're not just but I agree with you that there is a lot of war language happening, and it's very difficult to change things. We do have a very limited amount of time left. Um, yeah, thank you, Sherman, for bringing it to our attention. We have Bill, and Bill, could you maybe make a concise comment so we can finish at 9 p.m.?
Sure,
Hi.
thanks. Actually,
Yeah.
um, I'm struck by just going back to the language of war. I'm struck by the degree to which the United States, in particular, relies on that metaphor. It's almost comical that they don't have any social problems in the United States. They just have evils that need to be dealt with through war. We have war on drugs in the 80s. We have war on poverty. We have war on, education. Like we have everything, every problem is defined in terms of war. I find it not coincidental that this is a country that was born and is very proud to have been born out of war and rebellion and fighting. The way the West was settled in the United States is fundamentally different than the way the West was settled in Canada. In Canada, the RCMP went out and created forts around which law and order was established for the most part. Obviously, it's the West, but whereas in the United States, it was just grab your gun and go. And police yourself kind of thing. So the violence seems to be inherent in the basic fundamental fabric of the United States. And I was wondering if you'd comment on whether, comparing the United States to other cultures around the world, whether there's a lesser degree in other countries or other cultures to this dependence on language of war.
Oh, that's a question to me. I do believe that this is a common phenomenon in the Western world. So it's not just the English language. I cannot say anything about Asian languages because I don't have, first-hand experience with them. But many languages like French or German are also they rely on things like you defend an argument, so all of those business as war metaphors, they're all very, very similar. But it's an interesting point that you're making, that especially for America, there is a war on everything. To be honest, I don't know if the French would be using war on but actually the French love their wars as well. So I mean, yeah. So I guess the Western culture, I don't know, likes wars.
I
Something
don't
that.
see it though, and certainly Canada doesn't describe things that way. I don't see it as much. Using words like defend is that's a very weak association with war. Whereas the U.S. is everything is quite literally labeled war on something. It's very explicit in the U.S. compared to other cultures, I find at least. So anyway.
No, that's a good point. That's a good point. Thank you, Bill. I'm gonna give it some thought. I'm gonna find some examples from other English-speaking countries, what metaphors they're using instead of that. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much for attending this presentation. John, do you want to say any final words before we round up here?
I want to say thank you to Victoria, first of all, from this group and from the API on doing this wonderful and very informative and useful presentation. Thank you again. It was your first time, but hope not the last. And thank you everyone for coming and participating. I hope you enjoy it as well.